They said he was dead. Gone. Silenced. Erased from history. But 4 days later, Captain Ibrahim Traoré walked into a factory in Banfora, blood on his shirt, fire in his eyes. No guards. No press. Just workers frozen in disbelief. He looked them in the eye and said, "I'm still here." They tried to kill a man. But what they did was awaken a storm. Burkina Faso didn't just survive that silence. It prepared. Because Captain Ibrahim Traoré wasn't building headlines, he was building hope. And when hope survives an assassination attempt, you'd better believe something big is coming. If you believe that a small nation can still stand tall against global giants, if you believe Africa deserves to write its own story, not borrowed, not dictated, but spoken in its own voice, if you saw the fire burning in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt something stir inside you, then this story isn't just his. It's yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand shoulder to shoulder, because what began as a whisper, has now become a storm, and this wave, silent, steady, unstoppable, is rising, with or without permission. But survival wasn't the only shock. What came before it was worse. The moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré vanished, time froze. No press conference. No final address. No farewell from the balcony of the presidential palace. Just a sudden, suffocating silence. That morning, state television played slow footage of nature, birds flying, water running, trees swaying in wind. There were no headlines. No voices. Not even a logo. Across Ouagadougou, televisions flickered like graves left open. People noticed. Of course they did. By noon, ministries stopped responding. Calls went unanswered. Presidential guards stood still behind fences, refusing to speak. Shops closed early. Markets emptied. The city held its breath. Then came the rumors. He's gone. He was poisoned. They took him at night. No one knows who gave the order. At first, some clung to hope. Maybe he had gone to Mali for a secret AES summit. Maybe to Russia. Maybe underground, planning something bigger. But there were no convoys on the highway. No aircraft movements. No secret handshakes. By sunset, the fear had spread. Families gathered in silence. Streetlights flickered, but no one walked. Schools dismissed children early. Even the wind seemed slower. And then, just before midnight, a message appeared. One line, posted by an anonymous journalist, deleted within minutes, but it was enough. Meeting. No survivors. Blood on the floor. Lights cut. The image of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, so full of fire, so present, so unbreakable, now replaced by a question no one dared to ask out loud: had they taken him? No one cried yet. Not out of strength, but because they were still hoping. Still searching. Still not ready for the storm that silence would become. But just when the fear settled into grief, something happened. For days after Captain Ibrahim Traoré disappeared, as the world whispered rumors of coups and coffins, he walked into a factory in Banfora. No press escort. No sirens. No military parade. Just a dusty processing plant, half-lit by failing power, where young workers had kept the machines running, even in his absence. They hadn't been paid. There were no orders. But they refused to stop. And then, he walked in. Blood stained his sleeve. A bruise shadowed his jaw. He looked like a man who had wrestled with death and returned not for revenge, but for duty. The workers froze. One dropped a wrench. Another gasped out loud. Captain Ibrahim Traoré said nothing at first. He walked the length of the room, boots crunching over the factory floor. Then he turned, faced them, and spoke 6 words. They failed. Now we move faster. Word spread like wildfire. No official statement was needed. Phones buzzed. Radios cut music. The silence that had swallowed the nation cracked. Not with gunfire, but with a heartbeat. Markets reopened. Streets filled. Murals of his face were painted overnight. But this was not a celebration. It was something deeper. A national exhale. A sharp inhale. Then, movement. The gold refinery restarted its furnaces. Road crews resumed construction before sunrise. Young volunteers gathered at hospitals, schools, and water sites, not waiting for funding, just showing up. In Bobo Dioulasso, a group of students organized a vigil, not to mourn, but to declare, you can't kill a mission. Across Mali, Niger, even Côte d'Ivoire, videos circulated showing people chanting his name, not as martyr, but as mirror. Because in Captain Ibrahim Traoré, they didn't just see a survivor. They saw what survival meant. This wasn't just a return. It was a reversal. They had tried to erase him. But in doing so, they revealed what he'd already become, more than a man, more than a president. A symbol. A challenge. A spark. He hadn't come back for applause, that he came back to finish what he started. And this time, the continent was ready to finish it with him. But a return is only the first step. What came next was fire. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't speak to the press. He didn't call a national address. He simply walked out of the factory, got into a battered vehicle, and vanished again. No guards. No convoy. Just silence. And yet, by the next morning, the entire country had moved. In Ouagadougou, civil engineers who had abandoned half-finished roads picked up their helmets and returned to site. No contracts. No salary. Just commitment. Market women opened their stalls early, not to sell, but to cook for the workers. At the tomato processing plant in Kédougou, volunteers scrubbed rust from the machines and lit the boilers themselves. One shouted, if he came back from death, we can show up from sleep. And they did. The 25 projects, once drafted in dusty offices and buried under budget approvals, were now being built by people who had nothing to gain but the right to say, we continued. No politician asked them to do this. No ministry funded it. And that's exactly why it worked. In Tenkedogo, a teacher who hadn't been paid in 4 months reopened his classroom. The students returned barefoot, hungry, but grinning. Their parents followed. Soon, even the chalk came back, donated by a printer who heard the news and drove across the province overnight. Captain Ibrahim Traoré hadn't ordered a single move. But his survival had done something else. It proved something dangerous to those in power, that belief spreads faster than bureaucracy. And belief had taken root. Young men in the Sahel began digging canals, copying Traoré's hand-drawn water plans from leaked AES documents. They had no machines. Just shovels. But they had fire in their eyes. The kind no regime can buy, or break. In a village outside Dori, a group of women built an entire grain storage facility using only scrap wood, sheet metal, and an old satellite dish. When asked why, they said simply, he's alive. So we move. Meanwhile, in every region, murals grew taller, louder. He lives, one read in red. We build, said another. But the one that spread the fastest simply said, 25 for him. That phrase became a code, a mission. People didn't need to explain. They just nodded and got to work. Farmers shared tools. Students shared books. Prisoners on work release asked to be sent to construction zones. And through it all, no one knew where Captain Ibrahim Traoré was. But maybe that was the point. He didn't need to lead every hand, that he just needed to light the match. And now, Burkina Faso was burning, not in chaos, but in action. But the fire didn't stop at the borders. What began in Burkina Faso, with shovels, hands, and hope, soon spilled across the Sahel like a silent revolt. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's survival had done something no Pan-African summit had ever achieved. It cracked the illusion of helplessness. In Mali, students at Bamako University covered their campus gates with posters, "Not next year. Now." In Niger, local engineers reactivated a stalled solar grid without waiting for funding from France. And in Ghana, where Traoré had never even visited, volunteers began building a community kitchen under the name Project 25. The phrase had become a signal. Not political. Not even planned. Just lived. On social media, the tag #StillWithTraore went viral, not with outrage, but with footage: a girl fixing a well pump with her father. A woman training nurses in a village hall. A barefoot teenager planting crops where a development agency once promised a food program and delivered nothing. It was no longer about Captain Ibrahim Traoré the man. It was about what he represented, that leadership wasn't an office, but a spark. And that spark had reached places diplomacy never could. Even in Senegal, where the political elite had remained cautious, youth leaders met quietly to study how Burkina Faso had bypassed foreign banks. In Togo, 2 teenage girls began translating Traoré's speeches into local dialects and playing them through megaphones on street corners. Africa wasn't rising, that it was remembering. In Kampala, a popular radio host said it plainly. He came back from death. So what excuse do we have for silence? Governments grew nervous. But they didn't know who to arrest. There was no leader to detain. No rebellion to disband. Just people, moving, building, daring. And still, Captain Ibrahim Traoré hadn't made a single public appearance since Banfora. No live broadcast. No parade. Just shadows and echoes. That's what made it unstoppable. When you remove the face but the movement lives, what do you fight? In Nairobi, a child was caught scribbling his own country's flag beside Traoré's in his exercise book. The teacher didn't scold him. She took a pen and did the same. Across the continent, you could feel it, something had shifted. Not just politically, but spiritually. Traoré hadn't started a rebellion. He had reawakened a memory. The idea that Africa could move without waiting. Build without permission. And rise, without apology. And once an idea wakes up, you can't put it back to sleep. But even movements built on fire must face fatigue. Weeks passed. Some roads remained half-finished. Materials ran short. Power outages returned. International media mocked the Traoré effect as a passing burst of sentiment. The headlines read, "Hope isn't concrete. Energy isn't ideology." But the people didn't care. Because they weren't waiting for proof. They were building it. In Wahiguya, a group of nurses opened a mobile clinic using salvaged ambulance parts. In Kaya, young architects designed school shelters from compressed earth, with no formal training. In Diabugu, ex-prisoners built bridges with villagers they once robbed. Every act, every nail, carried the same phrase, "He came back." So we continue. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's whereabouts remained unknown. Rumors circled again. Had he been injured? Hidden? Was he protecting something bigger? Then came the turning point. One evening, a video leaked. Shaky footage. Grainy. Filmed in secret. A rural village. A dimly lit room. A projector flickering against a wall. And standing at the front, in worn fatigues, face scarred, voice calm, was him. Captain Ibrahim Traoré. He was alive. But different. No slogans. No fury. Just clarity. "This is no longer mine," he said. "It's yours now. The mission was never me. It was us." The room was silent. But something shifted. That night, a new symbol appeared on walls across Burkina Faso. Not Traoré's face. But a hand. Palm raised, fingers outstretched. 5 fingers. Representing the 5 promises he once gave: land, water, light, knowledge, dignity. The projects resumed. Not as tasks, but as rituals. In Bobo, people paved roads barefoot. In Gao, street kids painted murals with mud and ash. In Fad and Gurma, elders told stories of independence not from books, but from memory. And outside the country, in whispered circles from Accra to Addis Ababa, leaders began to speak a different language, not of donors, but of destiny. Traoré had disappeared from view. But the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. As if his absence had become the final lesson. He had shown them that leadership isn't presence. It's direction. And now, they had it. They were no longer waiting for orders. Or headlines. Or miracles. Because the mission had moved from one man's shoulders to a nation's hands. And no one, not even Captain Ibrahim Traoré, could stop it now. They thought it ended with one man. They thought that if they cut the head, the body would fall. That if they silenced Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the continent would return to its place, obedient, fractured, predictable. But they were wrong. What began as a leadership crisis became a moment of reflection. And that moment turned into movement. Because when Captain Ibrahim Traoré returned from the shadows, he didn't come back to reclaim a seat. He came back to release it. He stepped aside, not out of fear, but out of faith. Faith that his people had already begun what he once only imagined. And he was right. The 25 projects no longer bore his name. They bore fingerprints, thousands of them. From mothers building schools with their bare hands, to children writing on blackboards made from recycled tin. From market vendors funding solar panels, to engineers laying pipes with no blueprints, only memory. Traoré's survival gave people proof that courage was not suicidal, it was contagious. Across Africa, something subtle but seismic occurred. For the first time in decades, leadership became local. Not imposed. Not borrowed. But born from necessity. From within. In Burkina Faso, the phrase, Traoré lives, faded from walls, replaced by new ones, so do we. We build now. No more waiting. And yet, the man himself remained mostly unseen. Some say he lives in the hills, walking from village to village without guards. Others believe he crossed into Mali, advising quietly behind the scenes. A few claim he has become myth, not alive, not dead, but permanent. But maybe that's the point. Captain Ibrahim Traoré never asked to be followed. He asked to be understood. And once people understood what he stood for, they stopped following, and started walking beside. They no longer needed instructions. They had direction. The world continued to watch, confused. Governments hesitated. Foreign powers recalculated. They didn't understand how a nation could function without permission. Without debt. Without fear. But that was the legacy. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had done what no policy could. He had turned leadership into action. Identity into responsibility. And silence into uprising. In the end, they couldn't kill him. Because what he embodied can't bleed. It doesn't retire. It doesn't run for office. It builds. It returns. It survives. And now, it speaks in many voices, with many hands, across an entire continent. Captain Ibrahim Traoré didn't die. He became something harder to remove. He became a rhythm. And Africa is moving to it. If you believe that even a small nation can stand tall against global giants, if you believe Africa has the right to write its own story, not in borrowed language, but in its own voice, in its own time, if you've seen the fire in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's eyes and felt it burn in your own chest, then this isn't just his story. It's yours too. Like this video. Subscribe to this channel, not just to support, but to stand alongside. Because something is rising. And it won't wait for headlines or handouts. A quiet storm is sweeping through the continent, not with fanfare. Not with fury, but with footsteps. With shovels. With hands that refuse to stop building. The whispers have turned into a roar, and if you're listening, you're already part of it. The story of Captain Ibrahim Traoré is not simply about survival. It is about what survives through a man, and beyond him. What this story teaches us, above all else, is that real leadership does not demand control. It inspires action. Traoré didn't come back from the dead to give orders. He returned to remind people that the mission was never about one man. It was always about a shared vision, one that lives in the hands of ordinary people willing to build, to sacrifice, and to believe. This is a story about power without permission. Burkina Faso did not wait for approval from foreign banks, former empires, or global institutions. When everything seemed to collapse. When silence choked the streets and headlines declared his end, the people moved. They chose to finish what he started. And in that act, they redefined the meaning of nationhood. True nation building, as this story shows us, does not begin with funding. It begins with memory. With the memory of who we were before fear told us to wait. With the memory of what we deserve before someone else placed a ceiling over our future. Captain Ibrahim Traoré lit a flame. But it was the people who kept it burning. In doing so, they taught the rest of us that resistance is not always loud. Sometimes, it is silent. Steady. Relentless. It looks like children returning to school without teachers. Farmers digging canals without machines. Engineers sketching bridges on paper because computers have been shut off. This story also challenges the idea that death is defeat. Traoré's disappearance was supposed to kill momentum. Instead, it accelerated it. And that reveals a deeper truth. Movements built on belief cannot be assassinated. They multiply in absence. They gain shape in uncertainty. And they find their most powerful form not in protest, but in purpose. Finally, the story teaches us this: Africa is not waiting anymore. The days of asking for permission are ending. What Traoré lived for, and nearly died for, was not glory or legacy. It was continuity. A sense that even if he vanished, the mission would not. That even if his voice was silenced, the people would speak louder. And now they are. So, if there is one lesson to take away, it is this: when leadership becomes shared, power becomes permanent. When vision is held by many, no bullet, no betrayal, no silence can stop it. I didn't know I needed this story until I heard it. As I listened, something inside me shifted. This wasn't just about Captain Ibrahim Traoré. It wasn't just about Burkina Faso. It was about all of us. About what we've lost. About what we've stopped believing we deserve. For too long, we've been told that progress needs approval. That we must wait for elections, wait for loans, wait for foreign consultants to explain our soil, our sun, our stories. But then comes a man who doesn't wait. Who doesn't ask. Who simply starts, with what he has, where he stands. And when they tried to silence him, I expected everything to fall apart. That's the script we've been taught. Kill the leader, the movement dies. But instead, something extraordinary happened. People didn't freeze. They moved. They didn't mourn, they built. And when he came back, not with soldiers, not with speeches, but with bruises and fire in his eyes, I felt something stir in me. It wasn't hope. It was memory. A memory of who we once were. Builders. Fighters. Healers. People who didn't wait for permission to survive. And watching these communities pick up tools, light furnaces, reopen schools, without funding, without orders, reminded me that Africa's greatest wealth has never been its minerals or land. It has always been its people. People who, when they believe, can do the impossible. Captain.